Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lisa Sundstrom, and I'm a professor at UBC's Department of Political Science, as well as the co-chair of the UBC International Relations Major program. It's wonderful to be here this evening for the 2021 Mark Zacher Distinguished Speaker Program. And I'm very excited to hear from our special guest speaker, Amitav Acharya. I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging that although we're not physically gathering on campus at UBC, UBC Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, and that the wider Metro Vancouver area where many of us are currently sitting is located on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to reside temporarily on this territory, which has been a place of learning and passing down traditions for the First Nations of this area for thousands of years. These are challenging times, both with the COVID-19 pandemic ongoing and the anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and anti-Asian racism in communities around the world. We encourage the UBC community to reflect on what actions we can take individually and together to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our daily lives. Tonight's event is one way we're bringing community together despite the challenges. So I'm most grateful that you've joined us this evening. On behalf of the Department of Political Science and the International Relations Program, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. We're continuing a recently developed tradition of our own tonight by holding our annual Mark Zacher Distinguished Speaker event. Although it looks a little different in a virtual format than it normally does in person, we're so happy that you've all carved time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. This annual lecture was launched in 2013 and made possible by key alumni and faculty who came together to honor Mark Zacher's legacy as a stellar academic and teacher. Mark was able to attend the first few years of this event organized in his honor until he unfortunately passed away in October 2014. Mark made an enormous impact on our department as a colleague and on his former students throughout their academic and professional lives as a mentor and a role model. He is sorely missed by all of us who knew him. I'd like to say thank you to those who made this special lecture possible. Not only the alumni and faculty donors who contributed to the fund to sponsor this series, but also to our staff members, Chris Fernandez and Brent Holmes in the Political Science Department, and Rashad Ali and Joel Bentley in Arts Alumni Engagement, as well as our undergraduate student associations, PSSA and URSA, for helping to spread the word about the event. Our speaker this year is particularly appropriate for this Zacher event, as Dr. Acharya knew Mark personally and had many interactions with him when he was a professor at York University at an earlier stage of his career. In terms of the format for the evening, Amitav will speak for about 45 minutes, following which we'll have a Q&A session in which I will pose questions to him that have been suggested by you in the audience. You can enter your questions in the Q&A function at any time during the talk, and we'll select among these submitted questions for me to pose to Amitav. Please enter your questions in the Q&A, as that's where we'll be monitoring them. The chat window is available for communications that aren't questions. You can chat to all of the attendees in the session. It's now my pleasure to provide an introduction to our distinguished speaker's background. Amitav Acharya is the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance and a distinguished professor at the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C. He is the first non-Western scholar to be elected as the president of the International Studies Association in 2014 to 2015. The ISA is the largest and most influential global network in international studies. Previously, he's been a professor at York University, Toronto, and the University of Bristol in the UK. He was the inaugural Nelson Mandela Visiting Professor in International Relations at Rhodes University, South Africa, the inaugural Boeing Company Chair in International Relations at the Schwarzman Scholars Program at Tsinghua University, a Fellow of Harvard's Asia Center and the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and a Christensen Fellow at Oxford. His scholarship is particularly well known for illuminating the roles of ideas and norms in international politics, and especially the context-dependent nature of how ideas operate in different locales. Professor Acharya's many books include The Making of Global International Relations with Barry Buzan from Cambridge in 2019, Constructing Global Order from Cambridge in 2018, The End of American World Order, Polity 2014 and 2018, Whose Ideas Matter from Cornell in 2009, and Constructing a Security Community in Southeast Asia from Routledge with multiple issues. His articles have appeared in prominent journals, including International Organization, International Security, International Studies Quarterly, Journal of Asian Studies, Foreign Affairs, Journal of Peace Research, International Affairs, and World Politics. He's also written quite a few op-eds for newspapers like the Financial Times, International Herald Tribune, the Washington Post, the Times of India, and other newspapers around the world, and appeared on news media such as CNN International, BBC TV, and the BBC World Service Radio. He's received 2 Distinguished Scholar Awards from the ISA, one in 2015 from the Global South Caucus of the Association for his, quote, contribution to non-Western IR theory and inclusion, end quote, in international studies, and another in 2018 from ISA's International Organization section that recognizes, quote, scholars of exceptional merit whose influence, intellectual works, and mentorship will likely continue to impact the field for years to come, end quote. Finally, in 2020, he received American University's highest honor as Scholar Teacher of the Year. Now, to give us a sense of why he is such an accomplished and award-winning scholar, Professor Acharya will talk to us about the fate of world order as Western dominance erodes into a non-Western or possibly post-Western pluralistic world order in his presentation called What Can the Past Tell Us About the Future of World Order? Please join me in welcoming Amitav Acharya. Amitav, you're muted, I think.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, Lisa, for this amazingly generous introduction. And I am just not sure I can live up to this now. But again, thank you for inviting me, for giving this very important lecture, the Mark Jacker Memorial Lecture. And also in an institution, which is one of my favorite places. When I was a professor in Canada, I visited UBC many, many times and met with Mark many times. I do have many friends in your faculty, and of course, Vancouver is one of my favorite cities. I am, by the way, a Canadian, even though I'm living in the United States. I first met Mark in March 1990, and this is just a few months after I had arrived in Canada from Singapore, and I had joined York University in Toronto, not as a professor, but at that time as a postdoctoral fellow. It was really not that much long after my PhD. And I was trying to remember what is my first memory of Mark. It's been some time, it's 31 years. But then I remembered very clearly that it's about 2 things, the UBC Faculty Club and beer. I remember having a beer with Mark in the UBC Faculty Club. As soon as we arrived on campus, I was flying from Toronto to attend a very important conference that Professor Brian Job who had joined the UBC faculty just about a year before, he had organized. And in fact, I have the book with me. This is the book that came out of that meeting in March 1990. And it is one of the best books looking at non-Western security or third world security. And Mark was the director of the Institute of International Relations. So he was our host. And I remember sitting down in the UBC faculty club with him and having a beer. But I think I'm pretty sure, 95% sure, although a lot of my memories of people, my first meeting of people with people is over beer. So I think I'm probably a little biased, but I think there is no question that I met him in March 1990. And after that, we met a few times, both in Vancouver when I came to visit, but also in Ottawa, because as some of you might know, UBC's institute was one of the funded university-based research centers from Department of National Defense, which basically met as operating cost. At York, we used to have a similar center led by David Dewitt, called Center for International and Security Studies. So every year or twice a year, we had this conclave in Ottawa trying to tell the Department of National Defense, as it was called then, why they should continue to give us money. And I was a very major beneficiary of those funding, because my initial funding at York before I became a tenured professor came from those sort of activities. And over the years, my first impression, but my continuing impression with Mark was that this was really my first international conference leading to a book after I had done my PhD. And he was very reassuring. I was pretty nervous about, this was like a who's who of IR scholars. We had, of course, Carl Holste, one of your colleagues. I've never met Carl until then. And Robert Jackson, of course, Michael Barnett was there. And I'm just trying to think, there will be so many. Oh, Muhammad Ayub, Barry Buzan. That was my first meeting with Barry Buzan. And we ended up co-authoring, co-editing 4 books and now doing a 5th one. John Chipman, who is currently the director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He was there. That was my first meeting with John as well. So I was so nervous that I'm giving a paper that will be published into a book, and all these people are going to comment on it. And I think the person who commented on my paper was, I think it would have been Carl Holste. And it is scary. I was about 26, 27 years old at that time. And so Mark was very reassuring and said, not to worry, you're new in Canada, but people will be very supportive. I'm supportive. And that really conversation got me. And the next day when I presented my paper, it certainly went very well since I got into the book project. And that was one of my first and still one of my most important papers. So reassuring, being sort of a very kind, very supportive of younger faculty or a younger person is one of his hallmarks. And over the years, I have consulted him about some career moves. And also he has been in touch with me on a couple of things that he wanted to ask me about. I do remember a couple of conversations with him, which is very pertinent. In one of the meetings, I think it may be not a private meeting with me, but in a seminar, he said that, look, sooner or later, this world is going to get into a pandemic and countries will close down their borders. And I said, Mark, you must be joking. People will close down their borders? He said, yeah, this is going to happen. And I was telling, one of your PhD doctoral, one of your students, actually, Mike Schroeder, is my colleague in American University. And I was telling him this to Mike, he was a student of Mark Zucker, that that's what Mark told me. And now we're actually facing this. Actually, countries are closing down their borders. We cannot travel to Canada. Canadians can come to US. Who would have thought? This is supposed to be the longest undefended border in the world. Now this is closed, not because of a war, but because of a virus. So I would like to emphasize that although Mark was primarily an academic, and he, of course, wrote fantastic stuff. I will talk about that in my lecture in the department on tomorrow. But he certainly had an eye for what's happening in the world out there, in the practical world, and he was so prescient in about the pandemic, because as you know, some of his work were about transnational issues, and in fact, his last book was about that. So I am very grateful to have known someone like him. Was so reassuring in the very first international conference I attended, where I gave a paper that led to a book, and also some of his insights into world order. That's what we are going to talk about today. So let me now go to my presentation, and I will just share my screen. Just give me a second. All right. All right. And I will also put my timer so that I don't go over time. I have this bad habit of exceeding my time, and I want to really leave a lot of time for Q&A. So if I want to sum it up in terms of my main message today, is not the talk itself, the title of the talk itself, but what you see in the red letters underneath, that how we might get the future wrong by ignoring the past. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is about how the past of the world order, not repeating, history is not repeating itself, but how the past contains lessons, possibilities, opportunities, and dangers that if we don't pay attention to, we might get the future completely wrong. And we may already be getting it wrong, meaning getting the present wrong by ignoring the past. So let me talk about how I got to this topic, and a little bit of this is a very deeply personal project, but it's also based on my teaching and my research, but it has a very personal engagement. And I'll explain to you how this project evolved through in the last 6-7 years at least, in various places in Washington, DC, in Beijing, in Kyoto, where I was also a visiting professor, in South Africa, and also Southeast Asia and many parts of Europe. Now, the opening quotation I would like to present to you is about prophecies and prophets. And nobody is a bigger prophet, living prophet, than Henry Kissinger. And in April 2020, he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, where he said, that was the title of his op-ed, "The coronavirus pandemic will forever alter the world order." Now, this is not the first time anyone big has worried about world order. There have been such prophecies, such anxious forecast, at least since the election of Donald Trump in 2016, that something is ending, the world order is ending. Some people call it the liberal international order, or US-led liberal order is ending. So this is not a new thing for someone like Kissinger to talk about the coronavirus, a pandemic will forever alter the world order. Of course, we didn't have the virus beforehand, but people are worried about other kinds of challenges, challenge from China, challenge from the emerging powers, the global economic shift, and challenge from Donald Trump. So I will tell you a little bit about it to give you a context. So this is why I'm writing this. I have been basically engaging these authors and some of these type of books since at least 2013, when I published my own book in 2014 for the first edition, the second being 2018. But I have been engaging these writers actually quite personally, especially John Eichenberry, and a few others. In fact, even Henry Kissinger. But why these are important, because these are important books, especially Farid's book and John's book are very important books about getting us sensitized into the future of world order, particularly what we call the liberal international order. And in the middle, of course, is my book. The second edition is here. This is a debate that happened between Neil Ferguson and Farid Zakaria at the Monk Center in Toronto in 2017. And again, Neil Ferguson is somebody I co-taught with. He was a fellow faculty at the Swartzman College when I was there, and I debated him as well on a similar topic I'll tell you in a moment. And then I wrote this article in Ethics and International Affairs just before I published the second edition of my book. Why? Because we have been talking about world, or how the world ended. I mean, I just put it tongue in cheek. But this debate has been going on. Farid Zakaria actually, in a sense, started. Farid Zakaria, you know, it's the CNN Farid Zakaria, the host of the Farid Zakaria show. And it's called GPS, Global Public Square. And his book in 2008 basically started this debate, although one has to be careful about what he said. So this opening line was that this is a book not about the decline of America, but rather the rise of everyone else. So I actually, when I read it, and before I met him in person a few years later, I rephrased it in my book that what I thought he was trying to tell us is not like the American world order is ending or America is declining. He's talking about a challenge, but he ends up very forcefully about how America can still be the top dog and defeat its growing competition. Many Americans who acknowledge that America is facing a problem, they end up having the last chapter or last substantial section of the last chapter, making policy recommendations about how we can reverse it, how we can get America back on its feet. And that's what he was doing. And lo and behold, he did not say that the liberal international order was ending, because in 2017, when he was debating Neil Ferguson, he did say that despite stresses and strains, the liberal order is still intact. This was a recording, and I'm just quoting the introduction to that book that came out of the recording by the editor. But that's what he told me. I invited him to my class, to talk to my class in 2017 in Beijing. And he said the liberal order has not ended. This is even when Trump was already wreaking havoc onto the liberal order. John Eikenberry is the main proponent of the liberal international order, and he was very optimistic. And that's what he says. China will continue to actively seek to integrate into an expanded and reorganized liberal international order. And he said a lot more about the liberal order expanding, having more stakeholders, and no sense whatsoever. And this is no sense whatsoever that liberal order is coming to any sort of crisis. And it was John's writing that got me really first interested in this topic. And John Eikenberry is a very good friend of mine. I had him in my class just a few weeks ago. And we, as personal friends, we are very, very good. But I thought this was too much of a hype. And it was my book in 2014 was basically a rejoinder to his book. And so this is what I said. It is a fallacy to assume that just because China, India, and other emerging powers have benefited from the liberal hegemonic order, that's what he called it, they would abide by its norms and institutions. And I concluded that whether or not America itself is declining, the post-liberal world order that America built is coming to an end. So make a distinction between the decline of US as a power and decline of the international or world order America built. So to me, whether America is declining or not is still undecided. The jury is still out. But the American built world order is coming to an end. And that's the title of my book. I wrote a few op-eds and then second edition of my book. And I said, okay, I thought the liberal order is under attack from China and other emerging powers, but now it is also being undermined from within the United States, within Britain. And that's a really even more serious development. And then I also argued that Trump is the consequence, not the cause. Trump did not actually start it. He was benefiting from a decline of the American-led world order that had started much earlier. And Trump could actually push it over the precipice or accelerate the end of that order. So moving on then, I was very surprised that Foreign Affairs magazine, who has never had ever talked about the end of the liberal order, they were the biggest champions of this order. So almost word by word, Joe Nye, who also taught with me in China in my class, and he actually accepted what I had said in 2014 in this 2017 article. You would have never known it if you had seen his writing beforehand. He is the guy who wrote Bound to Lead. The United States is going to be leading, arguing against Paul Kennedy. So when I say the liberal order was a bit of a myth because it excluded Soviet bloc China, India, Indonesia, and it was more like a US, UK, West Europe, Australasian configuration. And it was not very benign for those outside it. And that's what Joe says, that it was a group of like-minded states in Atlantic. Big countries like China, India, and the Soviet bloc did not take part of it. And it was not always benign on non-members. So I feel a little vindicated. You won't know that, but this magazine will never have said that before Trump's election. It's almost like you're waking up from a nightmare and suddenly realize that the world is slipping under your finger because under your feet. So that this magazine being the biggest champion of liberal international order. I'm not saying that as a criticism, but that's the fact. Okay, so then a whole barrage of commentary, end of our world order. It's imminent, left-wing magazine, right-wing magazine, end of America's world order. Then Kissinger, of course, says that about coronavirus. And then Council on Foreign Relations, which publishes foreign affairs, comes up with, it's not just American world order or liberal order. It's just simply the end of world order. So I thought this is something one should engage. I've been working on this. So I had written my book in 2014 about the American-led world order, but I said not a complete story. If the American-led world order ends, what takes its place? So what was out there before? And this is where you need to go back to history. And this is what got me to work on this most recent book, which I'm about to finish, but is still far from in the final stage of a manuscript. But I've finished all the chapters. And I said, I'll go back and see, how did the world order come about? What is its history? Who contributed? Who created this order? Whether it's only the West, Europe, America, or other civilizations. What is the beginning of the main ideas, institutions, practices, interaction patterns that constitute the world order that we think about today? And that got me moving to looking at a cartoon that was published in American magazine, Puck magazine, in 1899. This is just before Teddy Roosevelt's presidency. And And this is very interesting because if you want to know about world order, you need a point of reference. And this particular cartoon tells you very graphically how the West looked at world order and how the West, and this time led by the United States, was teaching world order to the rest of the world. So you can see these four boys in front, four pupils rather, maybe a goal there, and they are from Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Those are the four territories the United States had taken over as colonies after the war against the Spanish. And you can see the American Indian pupil in the door reading a book upside down, ABC. You can see an African-American boy cleaning the window, and this is a Chinese boy just waiting to get in. And so Uncle Sam is saying that now, children, you have got to learn these lessons whether you want it or not. And that to me was basically a summary of the liberal international order. I'm sorry to being harsh, and this is a very stark cartoon, but it was published. It's going to be in my book. So to teach a class, you need textbooks. And when we talk about civilizations, and this is very clear, I could not find a single book written by a non-Western scholar on comparative civilizations, historically, going from the beginning to present, covering all the major civilizations, that is published in the English language by a major international press. There is no such book. If you know, I may be wrong, but I couldn't find one. So I used Neil Ferguson's book and Henry Kissinger's book, plus my own lectures. So I wrote this book because I couldn't find one that speaks to, I could find articles, I could put together. But I thought it would be nice. I'm teaching undergraduates, and I wanted them to have a book that gives them this big story, big picture story, just like Neil Ferguson and Henry Kissinger does. But look at their book. It is extremely Eurocentric, to say the least. So Ferguson argues that the reason why the West surpassed the rest is not because good luck, geography, sanitation, disease, or colonialism. He dismisses that. But 6 killer apps: competition, science, property rights, medicine, consumer society. He dismisses imperialism. He says that Western dominance was achieved more by the word than by the sword. And the scientific revolution was Eurocentric, means all happened in Europe. Europe had no help. Now, I looked at this and I found that even in his book, you'll find plenty of evidence how Europe got help from other civilizations. The British Industrial Revolution was stimulated by large-scale import of Indian cloth by East India Company, backed by tariffs and coercion that decimated the Indian textile industry. India, the largest manufacturer of textiles in the world. India, the largest economy in the world in the 17th century. And after being the largest economy for about almost a millennium, if you look at Angus Madison data. China, the largest economy for also, when India wasn't the largest, it was China. And after the British East India Company and the 1850, about the 18th century, and for China after the Opium War in the mid 19th century, their share of world GDP plummets and West takes off. So there is plenty of evidence in my book to show that. But Neil himself says that Africa and Asia becomes giant laboratories for Western medicine. Well, first of all, Western medicine, a lot of it came from Islam, the basics, but you need a lab. If you say you are using a lab and you say lab had nothing to do with your invention, then I think you are being very partial. A lot of the ingredients for like quinine for malaria actually came from like Peru for quinine, but also other herbs during the colonial exploration of the Europeans. It's all in his book, by the way. But his conclusion is completely different, that it was all achieved by word and not colonialism was not important. So I had to find the evidence, basically his own evidence that he provided in his book, buried in his, in the pages, but also a lot more research to get this out. And competition and property rights. Well, colonialism is the biggest form of competition. Property rights, sanctioned by John Locke and John Locke's racialization of slavery in North Carolina, in the Carolinas those days. All this has a direct link with colonialism of Europe. I'm not the old-fashioned post-colonial scholar, but it is incontrovertible. If you read the original work, if you go back and look at all this evidence, that colonialism was what I call a super killer app. It was actually one that killed millions, not to mention 90% of the native population of the Americas. Kissinger did not talk about the liberal order, but he was very sanguine about it. America is the modern world's decisive articulator of human quest for freedom, indispensable geopolitical force, and for the vindication of human values, must retain its sense of direction. So what do? I cannot give this to my students to read without having an alternative view. And there are alternative views, but they're not put together in the way I wanted. So I decided to write this book based on my lectures. By the way, these are some of my meetings with some of our friends. Neil Ferguson and I had a debate. Our students organized it in Tsinghua at Schwarzman Scholars Program. Farid came to give a lecture in my office in Beijing. Neil, of course, co-taught with me. And John, of course, just gave a lecture. This is the lecture he gave a few weeks ago in my class of his new book. And I ran into Henry Kissinger at the Center for National Interest. And I gave him a copy of my book. He's holding it. Just imagine Henry Kissinger holding the end of American world order. But I have no personal antipathy towards these people. But I think if you read their work, including Farid Zakaria, who comes closest to kind of my view, you are going to get a very partial picture of how the world order emerged, how it was produced, and especially where it is going. So look at Kissinger. Kissinger's book was my text, and this is very revealing. Chapter 1, Europe. Chapter 2, Europe. Chapter 3, Islam, world in disorder. Then Asia. Then America, acting all for mankind. Okay, so this is reversing history. Because the last I checked, the civilizations of China, India, which China is an Asian order, India is also here, India is here, Japan is here, but India and China, certainly, and Islam certainly came before Europe's rise, assuming that Greece and Rome, to me, are not European. They're Mediterranean countries that were appropriated by Europe. So Kissinger starts with a Eurocentric framing, Westphalia concept of Europe, then tries to fit the rest of the world, Islam, disorder, multiplicity in Asia, which also means cannot have stability, and then talks about China as a kind of a rival and cooperation, a collaborator. But the bottom line is, this is Eurocentrism 101, that as if Europe is the benchmark, and even if Europe's world order emerged, this is Westphalia, that emerged in 1648 afterwards, and by then China and India had 2,000 years of world order building, Islam since the 7th century. So I would have written this book starting with China and India. That's what I do. So here you go. This is my book. I actually think world order started in Egypt and Sumer, Afro-Asian beginnings, especially the Amarna system and Amarna diplomacy in the mid 2nd millennium BC. Greece and Persia come in later. India, probably the first world order, if you look at the Vedic period, 15th century BC, and very concrete evidence of looking at how the world is organized. China, little later, but still very, very ancient, and actually even more than India, very distinct way of organizing world order. Rome comes in more like a learner, learning from Greece, learning from Persia. Roman Empire was not unlike the Persian Empire. The first universal empire was Persia's, and first real empire, beginning of the empire was Sargon of Akkad, but Rome come much later, after even the Mauryan Empire and the Qin Empire. Then you look at Islam bridging the East and the West, circulation of ideas, including political institutions, philosophy, and scientific innovations. Then Europe comes up with super killer app. In that process, we lose the pre-Columbian civilizations. When Europeans went to Asia, they destroyed empires. When they went to Americas, they destroyed civilizations, not just empires. And then Europe, Africa was interrupted, very rich. And if you look at West Africa in particular and East Africa, all the markings of world order. World order in this sense means it can be regional. By the way, one thing about Kissinger, I do accept and appreciate that his definition of world order is not global order. He actually says very clearly in his book that any civilization can have a world order on a regional basis, as long as that civilization believes that it is the universal order. So it is a self-defined universalism. So he does think China had a world order. He does think India had a world order. He does think Islam has a world order, but he doesn't think they came before and they had anything to do with the rise of the West. So Kissinger is reversing history, but he is right in saying that a world order is not the same as a global order. So Africa could have also had a world order. was interrupted. Europe has then comes in with a double standard, one standard in Europe, civilized states, another standard with the rest of the world, with exceptions like Japan, where countries like China and India, who might have invented civilization, are not civilized because under European derived international law, the standard of civilization. Then city on a hill, America takes over, thinking of itself as a, the new savior of the world in Kissinger's world. City on the hill, assigning city on the hill. And then I end up with Rise of the Rest, and I talk about a new school that we should have using a text like this rather than a text that we have been using like Neil Ferguson or Henry Kissinger. Now, why study civilizations then? I want to be very brief here, but this is very simple. And this is what I tell my students. If you study international relations or international system, you have 500, less than 500 years of history. Westphalia, 1648. And this period is really the rise of the West. It coincides with the rise of the West. If you study world order rather than international, means inter-nation state. Nation state is a modern construct. World order unit is civilization, not nation state. And that has a 5,000 years history. And during that period, mostly the rest was ahead. As I said, the Angus Madison statistics and the all general statistics, India and China were the largest economies in the world for much of that period, from first millennium AD until 18th century. So, and also in terms of science, technology, even empire, and political systems. It's not just about scientific innovation or culture. It's also about political institutions, and I'll tell you in a moment. So that's important. Eurocentrism, you need to challenge. This will help you. Studying civilizations for 5,000 years will help you to challenge Eurocentrism, which comes on the back of Greco-Romanocentrism, meaning everything is invented by Greeks and the Romans. The belief that those ideas, their ideas are universal and timeless. Those of the non-Western countries are particular and temporary. Then explore multiple diverse origins of world order. This is the key message of the book, that the institutions, interactions, ideas, and epistemology that we have today actually was contributed to by multiple civilizations, not one. And this is the substance of my book. Policy issues. This will make us make sense of a rise of the rest, clash of civilizations, fate of the liberal order. I also want to caution against historicism. I'm not saying history is going to come back. The benefit of history is that history opens up possibilities. There are other possibilities of organizing world order, not just one. There is different ways of thinking of ideas, institutions, and interactions. The American way or the European way is a short blip in the history of world order, in the long history of world order. So history may not repeat itself, but it will open up possibilities of thinking of alternative sources of order building. Similarly, presentism, or what some people call it in jargon, tempocentrism, assuming that what we have in present is eternal and always the case, as if the Westphalian sovereign state was always there, as if the kind of democracy and political system, economic interactions, capitalism was always, because they're here today, and those things are already there. Although when Western scholars go and look at it, they will say, oh, they were there in Europe, they were there in Greece and Rome, but they were not there in other civilizations, the Oriental despots or the African or America's pre-Columbian American civilizations. So I'm also not saying that what we have present is actually very transient. Civilizations are historically specific. World order is historically set by, world order is kind of bound by time and space. So don't assume that think that we have today were there real throughout history. So history changes, and we can make some correlation between past and the present, but I am not arguing that you can bring the past to the future, or you can vice versa. You can look at the present in terms of use the present categories to analyze the past. So moving on then, this is something you will find. A lot of us think that West and Greece and the Romans invented a lot of these institutions. Partly it's a linguistic hegemony. Many of the terms we have in world order, political science, international relations, actually have Greco-Roman origins. And these are some of the examples. Things like hegemony, empire, liberalism, democracy, nation, norm, peace. So if you know international relations, this is realism, liberalism, constructivism, everything. But that doesn't mean Greeks and Romans invented it. We are just using their term. But many of these things were invented or originated before Greece and Rome, and sometimes alongside Greece and Rome, sometimes even in a more developed form in other civilizations, sometimes independently. So now when you talk about ideas can emerge independently. For example, cotton and zero were independently created in Peru and India, but India and Peru were not connected. So a lot of things can happen independently. It's possible that movable printing was independently invented in China and in Europe. But sometimes this is diffusion, the other way, that actually ideas spread, ideas travel. And it's quite possible that the West learned a few things. As I said, the most important political institutions of the world were actually learned by the West from the rest. And let me start with one example, democracy. Now, democracy, of course, we associate with the Greeks, but honestly, Greeks were not really democratic. Athens was not a democracy. I'll talk to you about in a moment. But things that we assume that derive from Europe, we take it for granted as universal, are actually not so. They are actually specific to Europe. On the other hand, ideas that are really universal, like republic, just war, great power diplomacy, freedom of speech, rationality, identity, have multiple origins, including European origins. And I want to give you a couple of examples before I close on how this actually happens. That things that we take for granted as Europe or Greek derived are actually not always the case, like balance of power, democracy, territorial sovereignty. These are Europe derived, no question about it. But they're not timeless. They're historically specific. Whereas ideas that are truly universal actually have multiple origins. And I want to give you an example of democracy and republic. Now, this is really was shocking to me when I actually did my research on this. Those of you who are classicists would probably know this, that looked at Greek democracy. I'm not talking about how many people are citizens in Attica, where Athens was located. Very little, 12.7% actually could vote. And just think of in Canada, when 12.7% of Canadians could vote, you won't call Canada a democracy. Okay, but more importantly, the idea of liberty in Greece was not to protect the individual. Greeks had no sense of individual liberty. It was to protect the liberty of the city. So it's a big difference between protecting the liberty of the polis from Persians and liberty of the individuals. In fact, Greeks were the opposite. There were no theoretical limits to the power of the state, no activity, no sphere of human behavior in which the state could not legitimately intervene. Aristotle himself said that an Athenian constitution was oligarchical. The poor themselves and their wives and children were actually slavery to the rich. Not belittling the rich, the Greeks, but I think Greeks get too much credit. It's just like, think about contemporary democracy, a democracy without individual rights. You won't call it a democracy, but we call Greeks democracy, the inventor of democracy. We won't give the same credit to others. Republic is actually a far more universal political institution in the world. Actually, the most universal political institution are two most universal, most successful, most durable political institutions are neither republic nor democracy. Is divine monarchy and empire. They have lasted much longer. We still have divine monarchy in this world. From Sumerians and the Egyptians invented it, and again, independently, but 3rd millennium BC, but we still have them. And Alexander the Great, when he conquered Persia and Egypt, he didn't implement a program of democracy. He was a pupil of Aristotle. Aristotle was his teacher. He didn't create a democracy in Persia or in Egypt. The first thing he did was to anoint himself as the pharaoh of Egypt and the great king of Persia. So this is the first example of a so-called Western leader assuming an Eastern institutional personality or institutional form. So Alexander the Great started the trend of West learning from the East, a political institution which is, whether you like it or not, the most successful political institution in the history of the world. Empire, again, before Romans were Persians, and the Mauryas. And again, these are more successful, but republic is also quite successful. There are far more republics today, by the way, than there are democracies. So just as divine monarchy was the most successful political institution before the 19th century, republic is the most successful and worldwide political institution in the 20th, 21st century. And where did the republics come from? Well, before the Greeks, this is 600 BC India, but these republics are sometimes Vedic republics. They started at least 500-600 years earlier. The whole bunch of republics called Gana Sangha, people, even literally, like Demos and Kratos. Demos means people. Well, here you go. Gana also means people, and claiming to have equal status. They are not democracies. I'm not calling them democracies. I'm calling them republics. Just like the Roman Republic was not truly a democracy, these republics were not also democracies. They're oligarchies, but they also allowed considerable amount of freedom to a large number of persons, as historians will tell you. So there you go. I'm not saying Roman Republic is insignificant, but I think Roman Republic and the Indian republics came about the same time, and there was no diffusion. They were created independently. So let's therefore think of parallel origins of similar institutions, rather than say republic. The idea of republic, like American Republic, was derived entirely from the Roman Republic. Think about others. This is my way of saying multiple global origins of institutions of world order. Look at Geneva Conventions. Now this is very interesting. The Code of Manu, 200 BC, just war, humanitarian needism in conflict. Well, in Geneva Conventions, after World War II, 1949, says that don't hurt people who are armed forces who have laid down their arms. Those who are afflicted by sickness, wounds, detention, they should be treated humanly. Well, look at this in 200 BC. Ruler, when he fights to forge in the battle, let him not strike those who join the palm of his hands in supplication, like surrender. Those who are disarmed, those whose weapons are broken, those who are grievously wounded. Now, you can find echoes of responsibility to protect in some of this as well, protecting people. But I'm talking about humanitarian law, a big factor, much more universal. We're surprised how universal humanitarianism in war is. And Richard Price would know, since he has done work on chemical weapons. He actually quotes some of this Indian taboo against poisonous weapons and other cruel weapons. So look at freedom of seas. This is one of my favorites. We think Hugo Grotius invented mare liberum. Grotius was a lawyer for the Dutch East India Company. When Dutch East India Company captured a Portuguese ship, with the Portuguese started an act of piracy, Grotius was hired to do research to say that actually, he was not a lawyer defending the Dutch. He was actually doing a legal brief for the Dutch in the court. And he looked around and found evidence that the sea has always been open in many parts of the world. Now, some people claim that he got the idea from Justinian, from the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was never a mare liberum. It was our sea, Mare Nostrum. It was Romans' own sea. Romans call it our sea. It was because of Roman hegemony that Mediterranean was open. The Indian Ocean was open without any hegemony. There was no Chinese hegemony, Indian hegemony. And as Bernstein talks about, that Indian Ocean before the Europeans' arrival were more or less a mare liberum. As long as you pay taxes, they were all completely open, transparent. What is the customs duty? Then you would be able to trade. That changed when the Portuguese went there. They introduced special cards, special privileges, escorts. They divided the Indian Ocean into spheres of influence, just like Venice, Genoa, and others have divided the Mediterranean into spheres of influence. So this is a quote from a 17th century sultan in Makassar, now in Indonesia, who told the Dutch, when the Dutch said, oh, we want monopoly in spices, so you have to pay us a fee. So the guy says to the Dutch that God made the land and the sea. The land he divided among men, and the sea he gave in common. It has never been heard that anyone should be forbidden to sell the seas. Now, tell me, do you think Sultan Alauddin got this from Hugo Grotius? I don't think so. It's more likely that Hugo Grotius, who had access to the Dutch East India Company's papers, trading in the Indian Ocean actually got the idea from Indian Ocean practice. There was no book as such, but those are kind of the customs practice, and customs is an important base of international law. So he would have got this idea, and then everybody gives him credit, and there you go, that the Indian Ocean practice, which actually invented the principle of freedom of seas for thousands of years, freedom of the seas, trade without hegemony, very much unlike the Mediterranean, where you had trade, but with Roman hegemony and spheres of influence of the Italian city-states. Okay, so I do a big chart of how civilizations learn from each other. I don't have time to go into it. We're happy to talk about it. Every civilization learns from other civilizations. The Greeks learn from Egyptians and the Sumerians. The Muslims, Romans learn from Greeks. Islam learned from the Greeks. Actually, Islam preserved a lot of the Greek knowledge. Without Averroes, or Ibn Rushd, we may not have some of the texts of Aristotle. He was called Arab Aristotle. He is the one who revived Aristotle and passed it to universities in Italy and France, in Paris, where professors are fighting the Catholic Church, which denied things like eternity of the world, that the universe was not created by God, but had natural origins. The Catholic Church was bitterly prosecuting anyone who said contrary to divine creation or eternal creation by God. Creationism, we call it. But it was Averroes Ibn Rushd, Islamic Moroccan philosopher, who revived Aristotle, wrote dozens of commentaries, and brought the idea to the attention, thanks to the Holy Roman Emperor of Sicily, to European universities, who then got an ammunition, says that, oh, we got Aristotle telling us this. And they also worship Averroes as one of the philosophers. I mean, recognize him. What I'm saying is that without Aristotle's metaphysics would not have survived, except in Arabic translation. There are a lot of work of Greek philosophy and medicine that survived only in Arabic translation. Now that's circulation of knowledge. And so knowledge came from Greeks. Islam not only translated, but enhanced. Islam actually advanced medicine in a fundamental way. Greeks were terrible in experimentation. They were good in theoretical writing. The Islamic philosophers and scholars are actually very good in experimentation. So medicine owes a lot to them. Until 17th, 18th century, Avicenna's text on medicine, canon of medicine, was used widely in European universities. Now, India learned from Europe. India also passed ideas to Europe. Same for China, same from Islam. Europe also provided a lot of ideas during its heydays, still does, like nation state, science, technology, Westphalian sovereignty. But the rest also taught the Europeans a few things: anti-imperialism, anti-racialism, universal sovereignty. Sovereignty was never really universal until anti-colonial movements said so. And if you have any doubts, you can read my book, Whose Ideas Matter. There's a chapter on it. Okay, so finishing now then, to conclude, my argument is that different civilizations have shaped same, similar, or different elements of the contemporary world order, either through independent construction or diffusion. Western dominance was possible, contrary to what Neil Ferguson says, by borrowing prior innovations and resources of Islam, China, India, Eurasia, Americas, and Africa. A lot of the evidence is in my book. Plus its super killer act, the combination of imperialism, slavery, and racism. I argue that imperialism, slavery, and racism are not unique to Europe, okay? There was imperialism before, there was slavery before, and there may have been racism before, although I'm not sure if scientific racism existed before. But whatever it is, the combination of these three, imperialism, slavery, and racism, is a uniquely European contribution, uniquely, distinctively European contribution. And the three never really mixed. And I would be happy to answer that question if you have one on this. Western dominance was challenged by anti-colonial movements, then economic shift. Now we need an idea shift, meaning we should think of world order, not in terms of Kissinger and Ferguson, but in terms of this whole variety of ideas that I have been trying to pull together. Not my original research, but pull together in terms of borrowing, drawing on different texts and civilizations. So I would say that stop pining for the liberal order, think of ways to adapt to the new reality of what is going to be a multi-civilizational world shaped more by the rest than the West. It could be conflictual, it may not be conflictual, but that's a different story. So let me then stop by saying that history never stops. Even Khaldun said in the 14th century, 1377 book, Al-Muqaddimah, all the world has been transformed. There is a new creation, a rebirth, a world brought into existence anew. So maybe Kissinger was right. The pandemic coronavirus is going to lead to an alteration, alter the world order we know. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be all doom and gloom. There may be a new world order. But I'm not going to go into this, but I want to end by saying, sorry, these are some of the books that I am going to play with, use as my text, but hopefully my own text will come through. So let me stop now and take your questions.
Thank you so much, Amitav. That was a really thought-provoking lecture, and we have a bunch of questions that have arisen from our audience to ask you. So I want to start with one that was posed by Barbara Arneal, one of our faculty members, a political theorist. She asks, your argument about the Eurocentric nature of world order is convincing and speaks to the centrality of racialization in the liberal world order. I wonder if you could speak about gender and liberal world order and the degree to which it reflects masculinist values. I should have put the emphasis on gender in that question. Yes.
Okay. I don't have a lot of data on this historically, but the data I have on gender is from Second World War. And this is really fascinating because I've been involved in a different project looking at how women, especially from the global south, shaped the UN system, including the human rights, in UDHR, and also the San Francisco Conference. But there's a book going to come out edited by Rebecca Adami and Dan Plesch, and I have a chapter on this. So I'll tell you one story that I am focusing on. When the UDHR, Universal Declaration on Human Rights, was being drafted, the chairperson was Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt used a draft that was taken from the US Constitution proposed by the French. All men are created equal, okay? Now, the objection to that came from a woman from India, Hans Mehta. And she said, if you say all men are created equal, what about women? So she put up a proposal that this is not acceptable. So you have to change it to, all persons. So that's why we have in the UDHR, because UDHR was basically all the leaders in the Human Rights Commission that first drafted the part of the UN Charter, Language and Human Rights, and the UDHR. They were basically Western. And here you have a very powerful woman, Eleanor Roosevelt, who could have made a difference. She was happy to go along with that. So that's one of my favorite stories. I'll be very happy to send you the information. In fact, a couple of chapters that Rebecca has written. And this is part of my book and also an article I'm writing. And throughout the post-Second World War period, women have played a very important role. In fact, the Indian National Congress, Women's Congress, played a very important role in the creation of UNESCO. And so I am focusing on multilateralism. So that part will be there in my book. Back in history, throughout the historical periods, different civilizations, you would be surprised to know, that neither India and China score very high when it comes to women's rights or equality for women. The region that scores very high is Southeast Asia. The status of women in Southeast Asia was much higher than India and China, although India and China influenced Southeast Asia. So that is another interesting revelation that I'm discussing in my book. But one could go back and find traces of this and evidence of this, that women playing a very important role in the creation of what we call world order. But the most evidence I'm going to provide would be in the what they call the rise of the rest.
Thank you. That is helpful. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate questions here. So I'm going to batch together a couple of questions which are about non-Western political theory. So Paul Thornton asks, as American order comes to an end, should IR scholars begin looking into non-Western political theory in a multipolar world? And I'll just add to that a student's question. Emmett Mark asks, have scholars in non-Western civilizations independently developed their own analogous versions? Sorry, I'm losing the question. It's disappearing. Their own analogous, essentially their own analogous versions of what we think of as IR theory from a non-Western perspective, and should we be turning to those?
Well, I mean, I focus on diffusion, okay? So I don't think there are independent modes of thinking. Different civilizations have developed different things independently. I say divine monarchy was developed in Sumer and Egypt independently. There might have been some connection, but cotton, zero, independently in Peru, independently in India, printing press, maybe movable type printing. So I think the idea of republic was independently in India and independently in well, the Greek city-states were Roman Republic. So, but there is also diffusion. But when people say that non-Western scholars are basically doing theories analogous, I don't know what it means. A lot of people think that non-Western scholarship is basically mimicking Western scholarship. I disagree with that. I mean, there is always, by the way, if you're a constructivist, mimicking is a form of diffusion, by the way. It's pretty good. You know, that's how norms spread. But it's not all mimicking. It's also adding value. Like you can say Islam borrowed from Greeks borrowed from Sumerians. They got their science, they got their alphabet from the Phoenicians. They got their astronomy from Egypt. But they also added, the Greeks got their initial archaic art, all Egyptian. But Greek art became something different. So they adapted and they localized. So that's what one of my main topics of research has been localization. But localization is not mimicking. It's adding a lot more and sometimes creating things that was not there in the original. So the Arabs learned a lot from Greeks, but you cannot say they were just simply translating and preserving like a library or translators. They were adding a lot more stuff and they're creating new things that Greeks didn't know about. So they brought their own package. So I like to think of intercivilizational learning as a question of, as a matter of all of the above. There is some mimicking, some diffusion, and some independent parallel innovation. And we should not really think that one civilization is a pupil and one civilization is a teacher. If you look at the 5,000 years of history, every civilization has learned from others. I have argued in my book that no civilization has advanced without borrowing from a previous civilization or a contemporary civilization. Yes, actually, that was the biggest challenge for me. That's the reason why I wrote. You can find tons of books on civilizations, but not very few of them look at diffusion. So the subtitle of my book is going to be Connected History, the connections. And some books have tried to do that. William McNeill, Rise of the West, tries to do that, but nothing in the scale, but what I'm trying to do. Because that's what I've been focusing, given the fact that as a constructivist, I look at diffusion of ideas and norms, and Richard Price will agree with this. And I want to see how norms spread through translation, localization, borrowing, but also parallel independent creation. So my sense is that non-Western theory is there, sometimes analogous to Western theory, sometimes challenging Western theory, and sometimes mimicking Western theory, sometimes doing it completely independently, and sometimes completely resisting it, completely in opposition, like post-colonials. One of the things post-colonials and I disagree about is that a lot of them are my friends and I borrow a lot of ideas, but they actually, they think that like global IR or non-Western IR that I sort of promote is makes too much of a concession to existing theories. I actually argue that we cannot reboot the discipline and dump everything that's out there. we should challenge them to become broader and challenge them to become less parochial. But we still have to learn from them and live with them and also get them to change. But post-colonial scholars say we should be totally radical. So there is a radical version of global IR. We just had a conversation on this with Michael Barnett in ISA in one of the panels. So he divided, now I am kind of a reformist and post-colonials are radical, so be it. But I'm happy with being a reformist and not rejecting what's out there, because I think if you look at the Global South scholarship, and this is my big argument, if you look at Global South scholars, they're not all post-colonials. There's some realists there, a lot of Chinese are realists, a lot of Indians are realists. There are some liberals there, and there are some post-colonials and some constructivists. So who am I to tell them you should all dump everything and do only non-Western IR, and everything that has been done is nonsense? It's not. But at the same time, we are not letting the existing theories go unscathed. Like they can carry on business as usual, completely ignore what has happened in the West and in the rest.
Thanks. I really like that perspective of this kind of mutual learning, mutual diffusion in both directions, and don't throw anything out completely. We have a great question from Nicola Hall, who asks, why do you never mention the South American civilizations, the ancient Mexican and the Incas?
I actually have a chapter on it, and a chapter I'm very pleased with. I'm sorry I didn't mention. I mean, I actually think of the Maya city-states. That's a form of world order. I look at the Incas and their way of legitimizing. See, a lot of this is about world order. So this is a bit more political science than I don't look at. I look at scientific innovation and infrastructure, but I think I focus on how the rulers legitimize themselves. And the key to all the civilizations and world order is the struggle between chaos and order, starting from the Egyptians. From Egyptians to Hobbes to, Barack Obama and now Biden, every civilization wants to see itself as universal, as the defender of order against chaos. And chaos is usually from outsiders. Now, the Aztecs did that against their enemies. The Incas did that, but the Inca civilization has beautiful things to offer in terms of their way of conducting, incorporating, basically assimilating or co-opting. You're talking about co-opting. Something like John Eikenberry talks about how liberal order can co-opt rising powers. The Incas were masters of co-opting. Before they actually went to war, they would actually have a lengthy period of trying to win them over, say, come to our side. Not like the Mongols. The Mongols will say, you come or else. We're going to destroy you. And they will set examples. The Incas actually really went around. They always gave space to the gods and deities of the civilization they're going to conquer. They adopted their nobility as a part of the elite of the Inca Empire. And despite what, the Spanish historians, especially the Spanish bishops and the missionaries, some of them are very well-meaning and they wrote a lot of good stuff, but many of them trashed the civilizations of the Americas so that they can justify their civilizing mission. Those people are so uncivilized that we are bringing Christianity to them. And that was the justification for Columbus's voyages anyway. Columbus getting money from Ferdinand and Isabella to go there to spread Christianity. Christianity played a very important role. Missionaries were just as important as soldiers in European colonization. So to justify, to legitimize their role, they had to trust the existing civilization, say how barbaric they were, how backward they were. They did that to all the major civilizations of the Americas. And I'm just giving you 3 examples of Incas, Mayas, and Aztecs, but there are plenty. In North America as well, there were very sophisticated Republican governments in Iroquois, which some Maya scholars have studied, the Cherokee, and they all had lot to contribute. And I have plenty of that in my book. I mean, because my students demanded it. I mean, the first year I taught this course, I had less but students wanted to know this, and actually it was really fun. Just one thing to remember that I was just telling my wife the other day, because we were watching a video of the Cherokee chief of Cherokee Nation giving a talk about how the Cherokee Nation has done since the Trail of Tears, and you might have heard about the Sitting Bull, the chief of the Lakota Indians. He gave an interview in the, I think, 1870s to an American journalist, and he said, the United States gave us food, but they took our liberty. So the Americans are uncivilized because they cannot live in nature. They have to live in towns, in farms with fences. We are actually far more civilized. We have nothing to learn from them because we are free. The Americans are slaves. They're slaves to the towns and slaves to the farms. We are slaves to nobody. They give us food and medicine and they put us in the reservation. We say we don't need it. So, I mean, you know, when the settlers came into the United States, many of them actually bolted from the colonies to live with the Indians because they found it much more free living among the native population than living in the, polis style colonies where everything is regulated. So I'm sorry I did not, it's a long-winded way of saying I did not look at, I did not talk about pre-Columbian America. In fact, it's a tragedy that many textbooks of civilizations just simply ignore it. Because, it's disappeared. I did say that when the Europeans went to the so-called New World, they destroyed civilizations. When they went to Asia, they destroyed empires. They didn't destroy Indian or Chinese civilization. But when they went to the Americas, they destroyed entire civilizations. So, but you're right. I should bring in much more to it. But I am very, very interested in how they contributed. The Columbian Exchange. You talk about Columbian Exchange, like how the Europeans brought in potato, chili, tobacco, and all these things. And potatoes saved Europe from famine and made them stronger. So we call it Columbian Exchange. I call it Columbian loot because this is a one-way street. The people of America, those who survived the smallpox and the disease, they had nothing to get from the Europeans. But everything from their civilization and their resources, from gold and silver to vegetables and fruits, were being transported, taken to Europe and also to European colonies, and even to China to sell silver to China and sell to China and create the framework of globalization. So those civilizations played a very important role in the European-made globalization, and that's pretty much a big part of my narrative.
Great, thank you. I think I have a couple of questions that follow fairly nicely on that reply. And we have about 5 minutes left, so probably a couple more questions. One question is from Manjit Pardesi, who asks, or who says, thanks to Amitav for a brilliant presentation. Can't wait to read the book. I have a question regarding shared fate issues. Did you come across any lessons from non-Western pasts about how to manage pandemics or seek ecological balance?
Yeah.
And then a kind of similar question from Danielle Luo, who asks, what do the rise of the rest and a multi-civilizational world order mean for global governance on a range of transnational issues, climate change, tech governance, financial governance? So moving to lessons for the contemporary, I guess.
Well, the biggest thing you learn from pandemic is quarantine. Quarantine was invented by Arabs. And I have a tweet on this. Manjit follows me on Twitter. And when COVID-19 broke out in January, I tweeted exactly how quarantine started in an Arab hospital. First time. People associated with Venice, the Venetians during the plague, I think this 14th century plague, but actually the Arabs did that much earlier. So quarantine is still the best defense against a pandemic. And that comes from Arab Islamic civilization. And there will be other things as well, but I think this is the one that is absolutely graphic. When I sent it out on Twitter, I got a lot of hits from the Arab world, and people simply don't realize. But this book is not about who invented what in the first time. I mean, that's a different exercise. I am focusing more on politics and world order building, institutions, ideas, interactions, and epistemology, region and revelation. That's another, we think about world order as very rational. What is rational? And they think, a lot of people think Eastern civilizations are superstitious, otherworldly, but every civilization has both elements. The European political institutions, whether Hobbes, Leviathan, or Westphalia. I think one of your PhDs, William Ben, has written a wonderful book on this, Political Theology of International Relations. Just came out last year. And I was talking to him about this recently. And he thinks that all the European institutions have a theological basis, whether it's Hugo Grotius, Thomas Hobbes, or Immanuel Kant, or Westphalia. Similarly, Eastern civilizations have also theological basis, but they also have very rational, non-godly creation elements. So Ibn Rushd talked about eternity of the world, that the universe was not created by God, but it predated God. He borrowed from Aristotle, but he enhanced it. And the Indians of Sankhya philosophy, totally non-believing. Indians considered to be the most God-loving, God-fearing people on the earth. But some of the major traditions of Indian religion is not about God. Buddhism is not really about divine creation. Buddhists created the first social contract theory of the state. The first social contract theory of the state is from Buddhism. So you can find these elements everywhere. But going to transnational challenges, this is a tough one, and I'm going to talk about it a lot tomorrow in your department seminar. This is all about global governance. And at the moment, all I can say is that, by definition, global governance belongs to no one. So the concept I'm going to propose, G+ world. G+ one element is that no single country, power, or you can say civilization, can lead global governance in every area. And this is already beginning to happen. China leading in infrastructure, Europe in climate change. Well, you can say United States still has monopoly in, edge in a military kind of type of a governance, although it's not global governance, it's American interest, but maybe they will get back to global governance. So you will have kind of some sort of a informal division of labor, not formal, where different countries will lead in different issue areas, different transnational issue areas. And that's part of the G+ world.
That's great.
I want to say William Ben, a good friend of mine, he's a UBC PhD. I think Will will be very happy. I actually thought he wrote a wonderful book with Oxford University Press last year, A Political Theology of International Order. And I have had correspondence with him about my book, and we have gone back and forth. And I really recommend it because it sort of cuts the myth that Europeans are so rational that they just got rid of God. Everything is based on human will. He said, that's nonsense. Everything has a strong theological basis. And that's true of every civilization. So you cannot say the West is rational and the East is God-fearing, God-loving. Everything about the East is divine creation. Actually, the Catholic Church was promoting, persecuting anyone who talked about non-divine natural creation. At a time, there were distinct philosophies in the East that talked about creation of the universe, creation of world order, on very rational principles. So I would recommend that book.
That's great. Well, that may be a good point to end on by celebrating a UBC PhD, their research outcomes, and a great, answer to a big question about where is global governance going. So we didn't get to all of the questions. Feel free, Amitav, to have a scroll through what's there and see the interesting, fantastic questions that were asked.
Okay, I want to just give me a second. I want to copy this and see what.
But
I know how to copy it.
We're at the end of our time, and I just want to say a huge thank you to you for being willing to visit virtually and deliver this tour de force lecture without the usual sort of pleasures of being able to visit and travel and visit Vancouver and UBC in person. We look forward to the virtual talk in the department tomorrow and visits with graduate students. And hopefully we'll be able to have you come and visit in person.
I would love that. I haven't been to Vancouver for many years, so it'll be really nice to get back there.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone in our audience for coming tonight. You've asked excellent questions of our distinguished speaker. It's really always a pleasure and a treat to invite our curious and intelligent alumni to engage in these events. So everyone, please stay safe and healthy through the bitter end, we hope, of this pandemic. Look forward to seeing you hopefully at in-person events coming up by next year. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Amitav. That was delightful.
So see you tomorrow.